Turning overseas again, and the food stamp program that feeds more than 40 million Americans will run out of money tomorrow as the US government shutdown drags on. But now a federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to tap into emergency funds. Sky News Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen filed this report.
A federal judge has ordered the Trump administration to tap into a $5 billion emergency fund in the Department of Agriculture to help pay for the National Food Stamp Program. The money will run out tomorrow as the government shutdown drags into its fifth week. Without the funding, more than 40 million Americans will go without food stamps and potentially without food for the next month as they wait for the government shutdown to end. But the Trump administration has pushed back against accessing this emergency money. They say it is only for emergencies, which doesn't include a government shutdown, and it's also only $5 billion. The program costs over $9 billion to fund each month. So the Trump administration says it's going to be messy and impossible to administer. To only fund it partway through, it could see a rush on people trying to access the food stamp program before it runs out, and potentially rioting and looting. They say the solution is for the government shutdown to end by the Democrats coming on board to pass the continuing resolution. Before the judge's order came through earlier today, this was Donald Trump's statement as he arrived back in Florida.
The shutdown proceeds because the Democrats just don't know what they're doing. I don't know what's wrong with them. They've never done a thing like this. They've become crazed lunatics. All they have to do is say, let's go, let's open up our country, and everything snaps back into shape. Let them open up the country, and we'll meet. We'll meet very quickly.
The latest polling reveals more and more Americans are now blaming Republicans for the ongoing shutdown. The Democrats have said every day that goes by gets better for them politically, so there's not really much incentive for either side to come to an end. Here's Democrat Senator John Fetterman.
This is not some game show about who's winning or whatever. It's just like we have to be better than this and just open this up. And I do, talk to any number of Republicans who they agree that we have this conversation about extending these tax credits.
And as Donald Trump made his way back to Mar-a-Lago, he shared on Truth Social some photos from one remodel at the White House people didn't know about. He's calling it the Lincoln bathroom. It's the president's bathroom, and he showed that before it had a decor from the 1940s, and he's redone it with all the glitz we'd come to know from Mar-a-Lago. He says he's used marble that was more reflective of the time of Abraham Lincoln as opposed to the green that was done in the 1940s additional remodel. Of course, this all comes as the controversy continues around the controversial remodel of the East Wing of the White House. While there is broad support in Washington, D.C. at least, for there to be some kind of ballroom attached to the White House that can better host things like state dinners, many have been shocked with how quickly it's happened and the extent of the demolition at the East Wing. It's one of those topics where everyone seems to have a very strong opinion. Annalise Nielsen, Sky News, Washington, D.C.
Let's speak live now to US political analyst Aidan Smith. Aidan, thanks for your time again here on Sky News Australia. Are you a fan of marble and gold for a bathroom?
It's an interesting design choice. I think that, to be honest, this is the first time in political history, recently at least, where you've seen this level of national attention given to White House remodeling and the like. At the very least, this is the kind of thing that would have usually been a story, maybe in the DC press, if you think about past administrations and their own interior design choices. With the Trump administration, it's a story that kind of has spread beyond just Beltway media, so to speak, and is something kind of in national attention, especially when you kind of obviously the public image issue surrounding this sort of aesthetic choices and the money being allocated to it, and what a lot of observers and voters might think of that in contrast to cuts for social assistance. So it's an interesting dilemma going forward, public image wise.
Well, thank you for taking that question far more seriously than I thought you were going to. I was kind of kidding, but it does play, doesn't it, to how President Trump has kind of almost reinvented the idea of what the top politician, the top leader of the United States is all about, far more seriously the federal shutdown really seems to be cutting through with people in the US.
Totally. And yeah, with the snap shutdown, it's something where, again, like, this affects about like 42 million Americans. I believe that 2/3 of families on it are families with children. So it's something that has a really direct material impact. This is something where, Americans are kind of used to federal shutdowns, and it's always kind of, even if it's something that understandably gets a lot of press in DC and the Beltway press, for most Americans, it's a lot more abstract usually when it comes to government shutdowns, besides, dealing with TSA at airports. This time, the shutdown with this kind of material impact on people, food security wise, ahead of the holidays, it's going to create a situation where if there's not an immediate resolution, could easily spin pretty out of control for the GOP going into 2026 midterms. And obviously the second order effects of that many people being food insecure at a specific time could have snowball into something so much worse crisis-wise.
Donald Trump appears to be in very buoyant mood. He's come back from doing a deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. He obviously had the recent success in the Middle East too. Is that resonating within the US? Is he gaining popularity because of it?
I think what's interesting is constitutionally, and this has been a dilemma for especially the last 100 years when we've seen the presidency get more powerful. Presidents often, their most, what they do on a day-to-day basis is so often foreign policy related, but that tends not to be what American voters really think about. And I kind of recall Biden being frustrated. There's a memoir revealing that Biden was frustrated that public opinion wise, he wasn't doing too well in the polls. And he was citing, what he saw as victories on Ukraine negotiations, for example. But that doesn't really matter as much to people as cost of living does. And when you think of someone like Mr. Trump, got back into office running a populist campaign, won decisively as far as undecided voters decisively breaking for him because of cost of living issues. Stuff like foreign policy, it gets a lot of press, but as far as people on a day-to-day basis are concerned, they're more interested in food costs, gas costs, electricity costs. So I think in general, despite the media attention, stuff like UAE, AI chip deal, or, negotiations with China on tariffs, it's a little more abstract for people. And I think that's kind of a common frustration among presidents of either party for feeling like their foreign policy, what they see as successes, are just not really breaking through with the electorate.
We do know the Americans are fascinated by Britain's royal family, or many of them are, and also interested in this whole dilemma over the Epstein files. So how interesting is it that the family of the late Virginia Giuffre is saying that Andrew being stripped of his royal titles by the King Charles could lead to some lobbying in the States when it comes to more pressure on how much of those Epstein files are being released?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something where we've seen the Republican majority under Mike Johnson kind of turn back in terms of going forward with releasing the full files. At least that's how it generally appears, and that's why there's been such a controversy among it. I think if there ends up being a change in power in Congress come 2026 midterms, we might see it go. Obviously, there's going to be public pressure on it, but as it stands now, Congress is notoriously catatonic, especially with no real change in party. It's not really a priority among Republican leaders at the moment to have the files released. But as it stands, so I think that, this will only add to continual public pressure on the topic, and it will just become a more uncomfortable issue going forward, I think, if left unresolved.
Listen, always fascinating to hear your take on it. That's US political analyst Aidan Smith. Thanks, Aidan.